It's Red Eye Radio. Gary McNamara and Eric Harley talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios, this is Red Eye Radio.
All across America and around the world, we are Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You know, we were talking about the fact of how much fossil fuels we actually have. Enough oil for 227 years, enough natural gas for 130 years, and enough coal for 500 years. If you took all the oil and that we have here in North America, for example, and made it gasoline, you have enough gasoline for over 500 years. Now, oil is used for other things, but that just gives you an example of how much we have here in the United States. And then we had played the audio from Stan Druckenmiller, who is the billionaire investor who was on CNBC last week, that just talked about Bidenomics and just said, my God, we've got 7% budget deficits at full employment. He goes, that's just unheard of. We've never had that. We're actually spending money as if we're in a depression right now, and we're not. And he said, that's killing. He says, right now we've got such an incredible opportunity that we have AI, which is going to increase productivity and efficiency. And so you've got AI, you've got all the technologies that we have today that were primed in the United States, in North America, to boom. And we have the ability to have cheap energy, and we have the ability to drastically increase productivity and efficiency, which, if you do that, you're going to create a ton of new jobs. Now, they're going to be technical jobs, which means the focus on society. Sorry, it can't be gender studies jobs that's going to save the nation. You're going to need people more with technical skills. The people that have great technical skills, great engineering minds, and many of those who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty will be the new jobs of tomorrow. Service-oriented jobs. Sorry. So, we've made them so expensive. We have made it easier now for technology to replace those jobs with machines. That's just the reality of it. Now, we've seen with AI that everybody's going to be out of a job. That's the exact opposite. That is what has happened since the beginning of time. You probably could look at the Industrial Revolution from 170 years ago, 170, 180 years ago when it first began, when we started getting industry, and slowly over that time period, all the way through over the last 50 years when we, went to, manufacturing, the assembly line, everything else, that people were scared all the jobs are going to go away also because of that. But when we moved, you think about the panic that must have been when people were looking at industry, and then because industry was making farming much more efficient. Remember, what was it, 98, 97% of people probably were, 97, 98% of the population was involved in farming 200 years ago, 180 years ago. And all of a sudden that ended to the point of now you have what? Less than 3% actually involved in farming. And then you had the industrial age, and then you had the information age. And now we're in a combination of a ton of different things. Service-oriented jobs, technical jobs, tech jobs, industrial jobs. It has just gotten wider and wider and wider. What I find interesting is all throughout history, when we have these changes, government believes, okay, we need to direct what's going on. And we need to make sure we have plenty of money because we're government and we can guarantee you a particular future. The private sector can't because we don't know what's going to happen. Like with AI. With AI, and if we really tapped into all of our energy and took down energy prices, how would the world change? Well, we know it's going to get better, but we don't know what the growing pains are going to be as you shift from one kind of job to another kind of job. And so there's fear, there's anticipation at that point. And so what you hear is, well, we can't do that then because things will become unstable. Instead of, well, in a free society and in a capitalist society, that always happens. The churn will always go on. It's when my dad told me And this isn't new. My dad told me in 1969, you better be good at 3 or 4 different things because you're not going to be able to stay. You better be smart enough to move to a bunch of different things. You better be good on, I forget, he said, sales, business, industry, and maybe something that you'd like to do you could keep in the background. But the fact is, that's what you need to be good at. And you better be good at 3 or 4 different things or you're not going to be able to survive in the economy. My dad, back then, he wasn't saying, because we even hear it today, college or trade, right? My dad was college and trade.
Yeah.
Because, and he said, he goes, people scream and yell for government regulation to make the policies that will make your life easier, and it never works. You can't depend on that. You can only depend on yourself, and I think that's more than ever right now. And so, you look at what's happening right now, and it's like, okay, you see more of a panic. AI means all the jobs are going to be gone.
Yeah, it's the ability to adapt has been there forever. The rate at the need to adapt has increased. And you're going to see that every time we get into a new era of innovation that starts to, and right now would be the AI. I mean, you go back 20, 30 years, and it really is what was the innovation behind the internet or the World Wide Web. Not necessarily computers, but the World Wide Web and the internet, as that started to come about, the information age, and now the AI age, and what the AI is how productive the AI might make us in the future. And that's really what it comes down to. I remember there was a panel discussion, I don't know how long ago it was. It was maybe 15, 20 years ago. And the question to Bill Gates of Microsoft was, where do you see internet? What's going to be, what's the purpose of the internet? What is, what's going to be the biggest part of it? And he talked about how people will use it. He said, in the future, it will tell you what's going on with your car. It will tell your mechanic what's going on with your car. It will do all these things. It will communicate, just all these different examples of what are these things that are useful to us to create a more efficiency in our time, also to save on costs and everything. If you think about the certain jobs that we used to have, that used to rely, basically heavily on the fact that people didn't have the technology, and it was only, a select few roles out there that could do those jobs. And now you think about, my gosh, you can plug something into your own car and get, at least basic diagnostics on your car, even if you're not an auto mechanic. Now, it depends on the level of the diagnosis and everything else. The point is that we have access to things that have kind of really made a lot of jobs irrelevant. And what that means is that the people at Google who helped to create AI, well, inevitably that layoff was coming. And why was it coming? Well, when you build a company that is built on that intuitive model and the interaction, then the human behind that, I think, probably should have looked down the road and said, at some point, this intuitive model is going to lessen the need for what we're doing at this stage. There will be a next stage in that innovation. AI will then go on to, if you think about cell phones or smartphones, all the things that make our life easier and make us more productive. That innovation always leads to a wealth expansion, because it may mean that, all right, the people that were building this kind of thing, like the companies that made fax paper, well, not selling much of that these days. But if you think about how we communicate and advance, well, the economy is ever expanding when we go through those periods of innovation. And so that's really where I think it's going to go. And this worry about, oh my gosh, it's just going to kill all the jobs and AI will take over everything. You're probably watching too many movies.
Well, remember when the smartest man ever to be president of the United States said one of the dumbest things ever, that, we're not going to have enough jobs out there because of the ATM.
Yeah. Right.
Obama said that. And we said pure idiocy. These people that you think are smart aren't smart.
Right.
Because that didn't happen. And every time we've had innovation and massive innovation and massive transfers of jobs in the churn rate of jobs and the churn rate of actual industries. Think about it. And that's why I say we can't even imagine what it was like, from farming to industry. The great migration into the cities that happened was massive over a period of decades. Absolutely massive, and people survived it. Yeah. But we always have this thing with every new thing that increases productivity or new industries that are going to be created that we're doomed because there aren't going to be any jobs anymore. Yet the opposite has happened every single time, yet we ignore history. Yeah, every single time we ignore what happened in history and say, no, this time it's going to destroy all jobs. And we have said that over and over again. I remember when I was a kid in the 60s and we were told by the time we got into the 90s, everybody would be working 4-day work weeks, probably 3-day, maybe even less than that, because there would be no jobs out there, because technology would take care of everything. Did that happen? It didn't come close to happening. The complete opposite happened. Millions of new jobs were created. And so every time we get it wrong, it's sort of like climate change. Every dire prediction never comes true. And then the next, now we're getting new dire predictions, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Should I be concerned that you've been wrong every single time you've talked about something catastrophic happening? Do we ever think, do modern thinkers ever look at this, or the people in the media that are constantly promoting fear, and say, wait a minute, we've been wrong? I will say this, somebody like Bjorn Lundberg does on climate change, and many, I think, economists have said this. It may not be what the mainstream media wants to promote, but every single time you can take climate change, you can take economic factors, there's going to be no jobs out there, and the world's going to end, it's doomed, and it's going to happen at this date, and 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 this date. It never happens, yet somebody comes out with a new prediction, and it's automatically given credibility based on nothing.
Right.
Based on no evidence from the past that suggests that's going to happen.
Right. And, but you create that fear because, if you're on the left, what you can't have is the expansion of wealth. You can't have the innovation. You can't have that growth in buying power for all families. But every time we've gone through that expansion of wealth, all families have benefited from that increased buying power, that increased financial freedom.
It's also the fear, though. Well, the fear is, I may lose, my industry may go away. It might.
Yeah, no, it might.
And then you have to go to new industry. Well, that's hard. I want to stay where I am. Protect what I have here, government. Well, don't go to, because we've heard about AI. We can't go to AI because if we go to AI, everybody's going to lose their jobs and nobody will be in control of anything.
Well, that's the thing is that if we want to, these jobs are going away. And, I was doing some more research over the weekend and over the last week of certain, the brick and mortar model, right? Reading Sam Ash Music closing their stores. Part of that is the fact that you have online retailers selling unreal numbers in terms of selling instruments. And the brick and mortar model for that industry, the music stores, really certainly suffered during the COVID years, but also suffered because if you don't have your own online presence, Walmart found this out in my opinion, a little late. Not too late, but a little late. They got it together finally, but they saw Amazon as their biggest competitor. You've got to compete and rebuild your business based on what Amazon is doing, which, by the way, was kind of based on the Sam Walton approach, which was about brick and mortar. You know, I mean, what are you ultimately trying to do? Get the product in the hands of people. And how do you do that? Well, man, if people will bring it to if company will bring it to your door for the same price and leave it on your porch, they'll even carry it to your porch. Well, those are the kind of things that, you know, it's sad when you know, people or companies go away in terms of certain roles in the economy, but it's inevitable. If you don't compete on the level, if you don't change your strategy, and this is something Walmart saw, Walmart management saw it, and they said, our e-retail business has to grow dramatically if we're going to survive long term. And they were right, and they were able to get a handle on it. And if you don't, again, if you're not adapting, that's what it is. With the workers, with the companies, the employers, you have to be able to adapt on the fly, and you have to be faster at adapting these days, now more than ever.
866-90 Red Eye.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by House Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
USDA efforts to reduce spread of the H5N1 strain of highly pathogenic avian influenza in dairy cattle continues via interstate movement restrictions of lactating cows and required testing. Additional efforts announced by Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack Friday include:
we're going to accelerate our work with states with affected herds to support their individual efforts as they consider movement restrictions within their borders.
Secretary Vilsack explains states have jurisdiction regarding intrastate movement of lactating dairy cows.
We're going to work with states as they consider movement restrictions within their borders to further limit the spread of H5N1 between premises, more quickly contain and ultimately over time eliminate the virus from these herds.
As of Friday, 9 states reported dairy cattle herds with cattle infected with the H5N1 strain of HPAI. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90 Red Eye.
It's Red Eye Radio. He's Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. I guess the point being made in our last conversation and the audio before from CNBC from the billionaire investor, and then the story on the fact that we have so much oil, natural gas, and coal to last us hundreds upon hundreds of years. That new study is and then you look at all the AI, all the technology that we have. That actually this should be a time of looking forward. We should be very, very optimistic. But what's dragging down everything is government.
Mm-hmm.
And as the one billionaire investor said, you know, and he mentioned what we did, the interest on the debt that's not going away.
Right.
And that's coming in at $1 trillion a year, that all that interest and all that debt, and then the increase in taxes to even cover, because the fact is we may be at the beginning of what we call the doom loop, where you have such great debt that inflation's not going to go down, the spending's going to continue, and you just can't get out of that circle of financial doom.
Yep.
But we should be optimistic right now, but we're pessimistic. Why? Government.
You're listening to Red Eye Radio. from the Uniden America Studios.
It's Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. I just love this story here. You know, we're always going to get one of these, but climate professor thinks we should cull the human population to reach emissions targets. Professor, excuse me. I swear I did not take a beer out of the refrigerator there.
All right.
As I slurred that last word.
All right.
Professor Bill McGuire is a well-known volcanologist and climate scientist. Well, even though he's a Vulcan, there isn't a lot of logic here.
No.
Who does not care much for humanity. I know that a volcanologist is not a Vulcan. He tweeted out
It's not?
a brilliant idea if you're in the mortuary business or work as a gravedigger. Quote, if I'm brutally honest, the only realistic way I see emissions falling as fast as they need to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown is the culling of the human population by a pandemic with a very high fatality rate. A few hours later, he deleted the tweet.
Yeah, the guy who, through his social media, is trying to, ironically, appeal to people is, in order to, because on social media, the idea is to grow the number of people that follow you. Just told said followers, most of you should die.
We need the climate mob boss. It's not personal.
Yeah.
The solution is your death.
Hey, it's a very complicated situation.
You need to die.
Look, we've done the math. Some of us just shouldn't be here. And by the way, I wasn't here. It's just stupid.
The end of the world is the solution to save the planet.
Right. In order to save the planet, we should end the planet.
Well, we remember that one nutcase going back, I don't know, it has to be 10, 15 years ago, who said, we need to reduce the population of the earth to 1 billion people at least. And what was it? Was there 7 billion at the time, I think?
Yeah, something like that.
And it was like, so you need to get rid of 6 billion. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How? If you're to improve the quality of life for humans, getting rid of 6 billion of them, however you decide to do that, maybe that's the whole thing about ignoring genocide. Is Zach Greta's philosophy? It's not working on climate change, but if I can be pro-Hamas genocide, and we can start with certain populations, it's the beginning of reducing the problem of climate change.
Yeah, right, there you go.
You would think that if they truly cared, they would say to themselves, the solution is our deaths, but it's always somebody else's death.
Yeah.
They're looking. By the way, I'm not advocating death. I want to make this clear. I'm not advocating death for anyone. We on this show have strongly come out against murder and suicide.
Yes.
This is from their perspective.
Death is a pre-existing condition. It's going to happen to all of us eventually. If you listen to these radicals, the idea would be, if we could just get, this is the idea, if we could just get one massive, extremely deadly pandemic, man, that would solve so many problems. For who?
Well, NFL fans, if there's less of a population, there's less of a need for personal seat licenses for season tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
One thought that came into my mind, it
really is, again, you just have to ask, oh, wait a minute. You say this like you're going to have immunity, over and over again. Well, we always talk about that show that they had on Discovery Channel or wherever it was. Earth After Man, Life After Humans, whatever it was called.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
I started watching it and then went, well, this is dumb.
Well, there's no point. I don't care.
Right. Nobody's going to be here to see it.
Right.
So why? So why are we creating a scenario that no human will ever see?
Right.
Well, that's the thing. They want to see it. No, I don't. I'm not going to be here.
You know, the streets and buildings will be overtaken by trees and animals and I don't care. And it doesn't matter.
Why did they get to live and not us?
Right. And why can't they mow the lawn?
Do they?
So they get to keep the planet and don't have to mow the lawn? I'm out there mowing the lawn every week like a chump.
Or clear the vines that are growing up the sides of the skyscrapers?
Right. They don't have to do that?
But
they're not going to have a standard, huh?
But the best thing is, was one of the response saying, so, Mr. Professor, what you're saying is we can't solve the problem, so you're pro-pandemic.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, my
If
God.
we could just get just one pandemic.
If we could just get
one good pandemic.
I'm hoping for one pandemic to save the world.
Come on.
We need a pandemic to kill what? Not 1 billion more? 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion?
Yeah. Whatever it takes.
Well, you know, that's my plan for Social Security.
Yeah, right.
We don't need to cut any benefits if we just kill all the elderly.
You heard it here, folks.
Wait a minute. Hold it. Let me rethink that. I'm elderly.
Yeah, I was going to ask. What would that age threshold be?
Always 1 year older than I am.
And
it would
on
go
a growing scale.
Whatever year I am,
change.
it goes. It's 1 year above whatever year I am.
Yeah, it's like, listen, folks, we want to talk about the word retired because it has a couple of different meanings. You know, it really is. Because you think about this, I think about what the suffering would be. The greatest concern that many of us have with what happened with COVID and talking about how it all began and why it's important to find out how it began is so that we prevent it, because we know the suffering that went on during COVID. And if something came along that was worse than COVID, the suffering clearly, of course, would be greater.
Would be worse, yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to see people suffer. Right. I know that people suffer. I know that they do get diseases. But when you're talking about a pandemic, it is on such a large scale. The suffering would be all around us and would, for most of us, include us. And that's what you don't hear, in this kind of thought. Well, the problem is all of you guys.
Well, that's because you should feel no guilt because they're dying for their climate sins.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're not.
By the way, somebody's going to hear just that part of it and say, who's that nutcase on the air that we need to die for our climate sins?
But they're not saying, look, I'll be the first to step up.
Nobody has done that yet, have they?
Well, I mean, it isn't. But even in this long line of discussions we've had over the years about climate change, what do we find? Well, everyone needs to live in a much smaller home, says the person with 2 or 3 homes. You should be driving an electric car as they drive something that's huge with a V8 in it. To the point that our own the very first climate czar of the United States, well, I can't be expected to fly commercial. Ew. I mean, he actually said that.
Because I'm the one that is saving the world.
That's a plane filled with ketchup eaters. I'm not getting on that plane. I'm not going to touch the surface that ordinary people have touched.
Why don't you people listen to my logic? It was important to fight ISIL. Remember, he wouldn't say ISIS.
Yeah.
It's important that we fight ISIL because they don't provide health care to their employees.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, Gary, stop exaggerating. Am I exaggerating, Eric?
No.
No, I'm not. He didn't use the word employees, but he said ISIS doesn't provide health care to the terrorists that work for them. He actually said that to Code Pink.
Yeah, we're not sure if he would define that as gainful employment or not.
And finally, a federal judge in Texas on Friday blocked the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's new rule for an $8 cap on credit card late fees. U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman in Fort Worth issued a preliminary injunction against the rule, which was scheduled to take effect on May 14th. The injunction was urged by groups including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the American Bankers Association. Pittman cited a 2022 ruling by the New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, which found the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's funding structure unconstitutional. Consequently, any regulations that come out under the regime are likely unconstitutional as well. If the funding for the Bureau is unconstitutional, any ruling they make is unconstitutional is the point. This will be interesting to see. Thus, plaintiffs establish a likelihood of success on the merits. Government has no business involved in that.
No.
You know, we saw what happened with remember the credit card Bill of Rights? And we followed that. What was it? How many people lost their credit cards because of that?
Well, what you do is you're going to change then what the market's always going to adapt. Whatever the government comes in and does, then the market's going to adapt. And the credit card holders' Bill of Rights saw that those credit card companies decided to take those credit lines to those individuals and lower them, if not do away with them altogether. Mm-hmm. And then what did we see? It was the advent of the payday loans. And, they were popping up all over the place in working class and poor neighborhoods. Remember, the liberals went crazy about that, too. Well, they're predatory. It's going to be based on risk assessment. Borrowing, lending, that's all based on risk assessment. It's based on your ability to pay. It's also based on what you agreed to pay if you're going to borrow that kind of money. That's what it all comes down to. It's voluntary. Is it a good idea? No, it isn't. But when the government gets involved, it's just going to pop up somewhere else, and that's exactly what we saw.
866-90 Red Eye.
We'll be right back with more Red Eye Radio with Eric Harley and Gary McNamara.
It's Red Eye Radio. He's Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. I just really wonder what's going to happen if you have Cohen testify, and then the defense comes back and says, Judge, there's nothing here against Trump, our defendant.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know what to defend because we don't know what the crime is.
Yeah.
We want a direct verdict from you to throw this out because they haven't even, after a month, the prosecution is rested, and they can't tell us what the crime is. And so they can't tie it together. They're saying a broad general thing, but it doesn't exist in the law, and it doesn't match the evidence that they presented, to the case. You're saying that this person stole a car because they walked across the street.
Right.
And just because you say they stole a car, your only evidence is they crossed the street. Just because you say that by crossing the street they stole a car doesn't mean they stole a car. And what happens if the judge comes out and actually does a direct verdict before it gets to the jury where he says, sorry, the prosecution has not presented evidence enough. Now, it would be the way that he could get out later on of having it reversed on him, and also the fines against Trump. Trump may just forget about that at that point because he's got the victory, and what's $10,000 instead of paying a couple of million for lawyer fees to get that overturned.
Right. Yeah.
What do the Democrats do then?
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.